Good morning from the Selçuk Museum in Ephesus. Here are examples of Sibylla stelas that were found here around Ephesus. There are many more than they can actually display. Many. And we know where they were found. And I'm here today to talk about something which has been preoccupying me for a long time. And that is the spiritual impulse or religious impulse in humanity, which has always been there. A longing for the transcendent, a longing for the divine. And either it's stored in our DNA, or it's stored in our soul, or it's stored in our bones. And it's always been there and expressed in so many different ways, going back thousands and thousands of years. As some of you know, I lead tours to Göbekli Tepe, temple complexes outside of, in the southeast Anatolia. And these temple complexes are all over 12,000 years old. But in Europe, for example, they found the image of the goddess Venus of Willendorf in Austria today, which dates back about 30,000 years. And then a lion found in the Schwäbische Alb, which goes back 40,000 years. And I'm here because I've been here many times in the city of Ephesus because of this goddess. That's not the reason why I came here, but it is the reason why I keep coming back. This is the beautiful Artemis, who was venerated here, not only in Ephesus, but also in many cities in the Mediterranean basin. There were temples built for Artemis and Diana all through, all the way to Portugal and all the way into Germany, today what we call Germany, but then of course as Diana. And this is an original statue of the beautiful Artemis, buried by her devotees in the old city of Ephesus in cloth to protect her. And it was found in the 1950s, along with the great Artemis here. They were laid side by side. And they were laid side by side carefully. That's why they're in such good shape. Like I said, by her followers, and they stayed under the soil for 1,700 years before they were rediscovered. And I have a website called the Veils of Artemis, because she appears with so many veils according to actually our needs. This is the great Artemis because she's larger than the beautiful Artemis. And you could say that they have not much to do with each other, but on the other hand, they're both the Artemis from Ephesia. We don't need to go into this, but these adornments that she has on her chest creates a great division among people who are following Artemis, a lot of them who are my friends. It's perplexing that there's so much disagreement about what they symbolize. The popular culture believes they're breasts, but they're clearly not breasts. There's another camp which believes they're honeycombs, because the bee is a symbol of Ephesus. And then there's another camp, which I belong to, which believes actually they're testicles from bulls. And the reason I believe that is because they used to sacrifice, maybe they sacrificed bulls to her sister, Sibylla. There's proof of that. And also if you go to Magnesia here, 20 kilometers away from here, to the Artemis temple there's actually rings in the place where they prepared the animals to slaughter them to that goddess. So they would tie the bulls there before they slaughtered them. This is for us, it's kind of bizarre, but for them it was quite normal. And you also see on this Artemis, she's wearing a necklace, which are the 12 zodiac signs. One's missing in the back, apparently. And then she has these mythological beings around her head. She had a polo, which is a large hat, which has been chopped off, and then she has classically lions and other animals. And you see her feet are pinned together. The reason why they're pinned together is because she is a eternal virgin, and there are her two deer by her side. That means the version of Artemis from here is a virgin and remains a virgin, and has nothing to do whatsoever with Apollo, her brother, and nothing to do with the Olympic gods at all. She precedes that. She was originally a Chthonic goddess, and I talked about this yesterday, that this word Chthonic is an old Greek word which means soil or earth. And there's a number of goddesses that were venerated all through Anatolia leading up to Artemis, including Hecate, and Cybele, which we just saw, and others. And they had no male counterparts. And that means matriarchy was the pervading force here in Anatolia for a long, long time. And they celebrated the co-productive powers in humanity, and they represented that. When Christianity came here in the year, John came here with the Mother Mary just after the crucifixion and settled here. There's a house for Mother Mary here that they believe she lived in, and there's also a grave for John. And when they got here, the so-called cult, and I don't mean that in a negative way, of Artemis was really at its renaissance point. And this goes back to my question: what do we want from a god, or what do we want from a goddess, or what do we want from spirituality, or what do we want from religion? Well, that takes us back to Artemis now, because Artemis, for the people around here, and I'll just go through the list, it's all written down. Her temple, which was built and destroyed 3 times, was the first World Bank. People stored their monies in the basement of the temple because they feared Artemis, and they knew their money was safe. Her temple was also a place where criminals could take refuge status, and they would be protected by Artemis. And even the Amazon fighters, when they started to get defeated, came to her temple and started to serve her. And more than that, she took care of the vineyards. She took care of all the waterways. She took care of the animal kingdom. You can see that I'm focused on the beautiful Artemis. And she took care of the mountains and the seas. She took care of the skies. In other words, she took care of everything. We say about, in Christianity, that Jesus is the Alpha and Omega. Artemis was the same for the people. She served every one of their needs. She brought us into life without pain. She brought us into death without pain. She's a life-giving goddess. And this is another camp which splits among us Artemis freaks, is how the Romans adopted her as the huntress in a short skirt running through the woods with a bow and arrow, and as a huntress. This Artemis here of Ephesia would never harm an animal. The opposite. She cared for them, okay? And even the Hellenic Greeks were torn with these 2 Artemises. Coinciding with this Artemis was, and it's another room here, was the Artemis which would then be called Diana by the Romans. In other words, I'm saying that the Artemis of Ephesia is a very, very unique goddess, which Christianity really had to fight to defeat. And even after they destroyed all the temples and statuary, the people still believed in Artemis. So here in the old city of Ephesus in 431, they called a convention and called all the priests together from all over the place in 431. It's called and what they did was, in the end, they decided that the Christ was no longer just a man, but he was more of a god. And with that, the Virgin Mary became the last or recent incarnation of Artemis. And it fits well because they're both known to be virgins and celibate, but they're both life-giving, procreative goddesses. And so you can see that this Artemis, some people call her a librarian because she has she has different adornment around her body, but she has a beautiful polo on her head. And again, she has these things around her chest which look more like Christmas tree decorations to me. Okay, and then she has the two lions around her, and again, the mythological animals there. So this is a rather fascinating episode in history because at the time of Christ and before, the veneration of Artemis probably started around 700 years before the Christian era began and continued at least 300 or 400 years after the Christian era began. And like I said, even in Germany you find her as Diana. And that's why I talk about the veils of Artemis, because she takes on many, many veils. You can see that I'm getting rather emotional about this because here's another version of Artemis here. And here's the last version of her temple. And her temple, which is very, very, very little remaining, was actually built on a marsh just outside the city. Because after it had been destroyed by earthquakes, they decided they needed to do something. So they built it on a marsh, a swamp, that it would actually float. And they put underneath it sheep's wool that it would float. And there's a lot of stories about this, but it was a gorgeous, gorgeous temple. And they took all the pieces of it and they built the Basilicum to John here in Selçuk. And they actually took some of the most beautiful columns from here, made out of green marble, and took them up to Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, where you can see them today. Here's another version, they say, of Artemis, but this is, nobody can really say yes or no. So my deep belief is that before the Artemis veneration started here, there was an ancient, ancient celebration of Sibylla. And these stelas here are proof of that. And she's almost always sitting with a drum. Very powerful goddess who probably came from Catalahuk, the first neighborhood. And you can see her with companions and animals and lions and drums and so forth. And these were found all over Ephesus, all over. And here's the nice description of how this unfolded then. The mother goddess in Catalahuk, Kubaba for the Hittites, again Kubaba for the Hittites in another form, Sibylla, Kabila, and then Sibylla in another form. The veneration of the Divine Feminine began here it is believed, in Anatolia, in as much that they venerated trees first. And that wasn't enough for us, so we started to bring them more into a form and actually bring them into a religion. And over time, we gave them a lot of detail. Some of it's very beautiful, like the beautiful Artemis, and some of it's rather constraining, especially when the Romans started to embrace Artemis. So, greetings from Artemis here, the beautiful Artemis, and greetings as well from the great Artemis. And I'm going to continue my journey.